Welcome to today's video on domain and range part 3. Today we're going to talk about the conic sections and how to find domain and range of those particular equations. So the first thing we want to do when we're looking at an equation is that may be a conic section is determine what conic section it is. And we do that by looking at the x squared or the y squared term. If there is no x squared or y squared term, then it is a parabola. So for example, you could have y equals a times x minus h squared plus k, or you could have x equals a times y minus k squared plus h. Those are the standard form equations for a parabola, but notice only one of the terms is squared, not both of them. If they have the same sign, both positive or both negative, and the same coefficient, then it is a circle. So remember the standard form equation for a circle, x minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals r squared. If, get back there. If they have the same sign, both positive or both negative, and they have different coefficients, then it is an ellipse. So x minus h squared over a squared plus y minus k squared over b squared equals 1. And if they have different signs, one is positive and one is negative, then it is a hyperbola. Like this. But then it's negative. Alright, so that's how we would identify which conic section it is. Then we would write the equation in standard form and graph it. And then we could state the domain and range. So let's do some examples. So first, state the domain and range for this particular equation. Well, we look at it and we recognize that this is the equation of a circle. So remember, a circle, we can figure out the center, because the center, remember, is the h and k part. So in this case, the center is -1 and 2. And the radius is equal to the square root of 36, which is 6. So when we graph this here, -1 up 2, and then we can go 6 in each direction. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, up 6, to the right 6, and down 6. So the center is -1, 2. And then there's our circle. So if you notice, the domain, the x, so if we add 6 to -1, we get 5. And if we add 6 to, if we subtract 6 from -1, we get -7. And if we add 6 to -1, we get 5. So that's our domain. We go 6 this way, 6 that way. And then the range, we go 6 down, so 2 minus 6 is -4, and 6 up is 8. So there's our domain and range for the circle. Alright, so the next one we look at, we should notice since it's minus, it is a hyperbola. So if it's a hyperbola, we actually need to divide by the number here to get it equal to 1. So we have x squared over 225 minus y squared over 225 is equal to 1. So that means that a is 15 and b is 15 because a squared is equal to 225 and you take the square root. Same with b squared. And the center of the hyperbola is 0, 0. So that means the center of the hyperbola is right there at 0, 0. And what that means is you're going to go 15 to the left and 15 to the right. Now you know this goes left to right because the x comes first. If the y came first, then it would go up and down. So 15, and we'll go by 2. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, and 15 can be in the middle. So negative 15, comma 0. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 and a half. So 15, comma 0. So those are our hyperbola. Because remember, for a hyperbola, we also would have a little box that we make with the b. So you go up 15, so up 7 and a half, and down 7 and a half. And remember, you'd make a little box. Like that. And then you would have your asymptotes that go this way, and your asymptotes that go that way. And then here's your hyperbola that follows it. All this should ring a bell from Algebra 2. Now, as far as domain and range go, well, if you notice, depending upon which direction it goes, here the domain, notice x can be anything to the less than negative 15, and then anything greater than 15. Oops. And then for the range, if you notice, it goes up and down in all directions, so the range is all real numbers. So depending upon, for a hyperbola, what direction it faces, you'll have a restriction for the domain, but then the range will be all real numbers. And if the hyperbola went up and down, then you'd have a restriction on the range, but then the domain would be all real numbers. All right, so then the next one you look at, notice it's a plus sign, but different coefficients. So this is an ellipse. So when you divide by 100, you get x squared over 4 plus y squared over 25 equals 1. And then, so that means a squared equals 4. That means a equals 2. Y squared equals 25. That means, or sorry, b squared equals 25. That means b equals 5. So the center of the ellipse is at 0, 0. And that means you go to the left and right 2, and up and down 5. 2, 3, 4, 5. So there's our ellipse. So the top here is 0, 5, the bottom is 0, negative 5. So the range is from negative 5 to positive 5, because you go from bottom to top. And the domain is from negative 2 to positive 2, because you go left to right. All right, next one. So if you look at this one, it only has one squared term. This is a parabola. And remember, we've already talked about how to find the domain and range of a parabola. Remember, the domain is all real numbers. And the range, you substitute in for the squared part with 0 to infinity. So then you distribute. Now, negative 2 times infinity is negative infinity. And then you subtract 5. So 0 minus 5 is negative 5. Negative infinity minus 5 is the same as negative infinity plus negative 5. So it's still going to be negative infinity. And then remember, you have to have the smaller one come first. So it's less than or equal to negative 5. So that is your range. All right, then if you notice here, there is another parabola, except now it's x equals. But first, we're going to subtract 5. So we get x equals negative 1/4 times y minus 1 squared minus 5. So remember, now we're going to find the range first, which means it's all real numbers. And then for the domain, we are going to substitute in the greater than or equal to 0 for the squared part. So you get 0 to negative infinity, because negative 1/4 times infinity, minus 5. So then you get negative 5 to negative infinity, which means negative infinity to negative 5. So less than or equal to negative 5. All right. The last one is if they give you an equation like this, how do you identify the conic section? Well, you look, and since the squared terms, there's a plus sign in the middle, so that means it's either a circle or an ellipse, because remember, you eliminate parabola because there's a squared for both of them. The minus sign, there's no minus sign there, so it means it's not a hyperbola. So it's either a circle or ellipse, and it's an ellipse because the coefficients are different. So the first thing we do is identify that it's an ellipse. So then we're going to rewrite it in standard form using completing the square. So 9x squared minus 54x, so gather the x's together, and then plus 4y squared plus 40y, and then move the 145 over. So equals negative 145. All right, so remember, with completing the square here, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to factor out the number in front of the x. So 9, make it x squared minus 6x. And here we're going to take out a 4. So it's 4 times y plus 10. Sorry, y squared plus 10y equals negative 145. So now in each parenthesis, we're going to complete the square. So here I go, negative 6 divided by 2 equals negative 3. Squared equals 9. So that's what I'm going to add here. Here I'm going to go 10 divided by 2 is 5. Squared is 25. That's what I'm going to add there. Now, when I add it to the other side, I have to keep into consideration the 9 in front. So 9 times 9 is 81, and 4 times 25 is 100. So that's what I add to the other side. So now, 9 times, and remember, I'm going to make this a perfect square binomial. And remember, the number that goes here is what I squared to get 9, so x minus 3 squared, plus 4 times, in this case, y plus 5 squared, equals, when I add this up, it gives me 36. Then remember, I need to get it equal to 1. So I divide by 36. And notice I get x minus 3 squared over 4 plus y plus 5 squared over 9 equals 1. So that's my equation for my ellipse. The center, remember, is 3, negative 5. And then my b term is the square root of 9, which is 3. And my a term is 2. So when I graph it on the next page, my center is 3, -5. And then my a term is 2. My b term is 3. And so that means my domain is from 1 to 5, and my range is from -8 to -2. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you have any questions, please feel free to ask in class. Have a good evening.